is Frida, and I'm a 10th grader at Montgomery High School, and I am taking Filipino 1 right now this year. And before we begin, I would like to remind the attendees to mute your microphones, and I would like to introduce the session's presenter, Dr. Cook.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Frida. I really appreciate that. So thanks for letting me be here. What a wonderful day. I always love this event because it reminds me of my responsibility as a Manong to give back to my community and to make sure that I'm a part of something that's really beautiful for our Filipino heritage and for our people. So if you look at me, just kind of from the outside, you could probably understand that I come from a mixed background. My mother is Filipino and my dad's from Haiti. And I have always grown up understanding and knowing that, but I've always believed that my cultural roots always lie with my grandma, my Lola, who pretty much raised me. And I've always wanted to give back to my community in a different way about expressing how people of mixed descent have different experiences sometimes. Now, it's a little ironic because when we use the word mestizo, it means mixed, right? And Filipino culture, for the most part, is mixed. You have the Spanish influence, you have the Chinese influence, you have the American influence. So I use that term a little bit loosely, when I say mixed, because I'm talking about people who perhaps identify as Filipino and then have another equally balanced culture. It could be African American, it could be white, it could be Mexican. Growing up in the South Bay, I think we all know that we are surrounded by many different types of people. And when I married my wife, I was one of the first Filipinos she had ever met. And she grew up all the way near the Oregon border. So it goes without saying that, sometimes we don't look around us and think about, um, how we have started becoming more and more the norm in terms of people understanding Filipino culture. Because when I was growing up, to see a Filipino on TV or anywhere was like amazing. If you saw it, like it was incredible. Like you just thought like everything was changing, and now it's becoming a little bit more of the norm. So this presentation today is just intended to have a conversation about what are some shared experience about being people who are mixed. What is it like being for people who maybe don't consider themselves mixed, but understand that they have relatives, friends, or perhaps are in an interracial relationship, and what that kind of brings to the table. So I intend to kind of make this a little bit interactive, and we will have some fun videos to look at too together. And I promise, at the end of this, I will always be here, for you. I want to be the cool Tito who kind of you can hang out and talk with, and if you need anything, I'm here for you. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we're going to jump into this with a little bit of a trivia contest. I want to see if you know these people, all right? And then we'll kind of start talking a little bit about this mestizo experience and what it can mean for us culturally as we move forward together as Filipinos, all right? So, all right, so let me go ahead and share. I believe you can see my screen now. Is that true, Margaret? Yeah, everybody can see the screen? All right, very cool. All right, so I always like to tell people, I always ask people to look at this as if you are someone who is mixed, don't be mixed up, right? Who you are matters, and sometimes when people consider themselves mixed, they forget that they're two wholes and not two halves, and we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. Okay, it looks like there was a question. I'm not sure if that was a hand raised or Margaret, am I supposed to answer those questions in a moment? I don't know if the hand was raised. It looks like, okay. If you want to ask a question, I'm here. Go for it.
Sorry about that. I couldn't get to my unmute button. It was like
Okay.
not showing up for me. But I do see that what we can do is if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box.
Okay.
And then if you can just check in with me, Dr. Cook, every now and then, I'll let you know what questions come up.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let's play a little bit of trivia, all right? So I do have the names here. If you look carefully, you can figure out who they are. But I want to see if you know the significance of these people, because again, I want to let you know, it was rare to see Filipinos in the mainstream as much as we do now. Like, I almost find it kind of crazy when we don't see them anymore. Okay, so all right, let's go ahead and get started with this. All right, so the first person, I'm pretty sure if you liked High School Musical, you probably have seen Vanessa Hudgens. She actually looks like my cousin. I kind of crack up because I call her that. And you can see, right? If we look and ask ourselves, do we have a Filipino radar? Do you see it and say, yeah, she's Filipino. I can kind of sense it or see it, right? All right, next person I got for you, okay, is, Batista, the wrestler. If you look at his left arm, you can see the Filipino flag, right, on his arm. Now, I used to be that buff because most Filipinos are this buff, but it's been a long time since I've worked out. I've had too much rice and adobo. Things have not been good for me lately, but it's all good. It's all good. All right. All right. And then we have Apple to App, who is from the Black Eyed Peas. So if you love hip hop, rap music, you're seeing a lot of that come out more, right? And APL stands for Alan Pinedo Lindo. So something just to kind of, know, right? Of course, what a talented musician and artist, Bruno Mars. And, when I first saw Bruno Mars, I just remember going, man, he looks Filipino. And then it's just kind of interesting. You kind of start getting that Filipino radar of seeing people and saying, oh yeah, I think they're Filipino. So a singer back in my day, maybe you know him, maybe you don't, okay, but Enrique Iglesias, his father is perhaps one of the best known singers in the Mexican world, okay? Julio Iglesias. All right, Darren Criss. Now I wanted to kind of pause here, right, and say, there are mixes, right, that perhaps can pass, or what we like to say as passing, right? Like you would not know, and he might be privy to different experiences about being half Filipino and half white. So for all intents and purposes, most people would probably look at Darren Criss and see him as someone who's white. Now, Darren Criss was on the show called Glee. And if you look up his history, it's very interesting. He talks a lot about what it was like to be someone of mixed descent, but who could pass. I've always been interested in people who are mixed because of that experience, about how they have ambiguous looks and how perhaps they're received, right? My friend who is also half Filipino, she has a situation often in which people don't know what she is. And when she does reveal it, she gets challenged, right? About who she is, and they have to almost overcompensate, right? So again, even though I say half, I do mean kind of two parts of a whole, all right? So whole coming together, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, just a couple more people. Now, I didn't know who this was. I was just having a talk with my daughter, and this made me feel super, super old today, because I was telling her, oh, yeah, I'm going to go speak about, mixed people. You're mixed. Your mom is black and white, and your dad is Haitian and Filipino. And she goes, you know who Olivia Rodrigo is, right, Dad? And I go, not a clue. And she, we listened to some of her music, and I recognize the music, and and again, here's another classic example, right, of Filipinos being in the mainstream. And I love her music. I think she's very talented. And so when you listen to her interview, her father is Filipino, and he has talked about what it was like, being married to a white woman and raising a mixed daughter, and being part of a Filipino culture that really embraces and values singing, dancing, the things that we know make our culture such a great part of creating a sense of community. I always try to tell people, I think Filipinos are such great buffer people. You can put them with anybody. They get along so well, because there's so many different connections, especially with Pacific Islanders, perhaps because of our look, our location. You put us with our Mexican brothers and sisters, and you put the food together, you put the culture together, and amazing things are happening, right? With the American culture, like Filipinos have embraced American culture. Some call it or refer to it as white culture, but when we take a look at American culture, we think about, all the influences of Navy bases being out in the Philippines. Okay, that's how my dad and my mom met. Okay, so he was part of that kind of different wave. And then just a couple more here. Who doesn't love Joe Coy? And his imitations. I think I was listening to Tati this morning, and I just kept cracking up because we all know that Filipino accent, and my mother, we can do all of those things, right? And yet people who never had heard that accent growing up, like my best friends who were Mexican and Korean, they all can talk like my mom. They'll come over and, where's the papers? Huh? Ricky, come here, take off your shoes. Okay, they can all do it. And when we hear Jokoy do it now, it's to an audience that people have never heard that accent perhaps. And it just blows my mind that we're seeing this at such a higher level now. All right. We have players in the NBA, Jordan Clarkson, who used to play for the Lakers. If you don't know, go Google and you'll see how important, the Miss Universe pageant is in the Philippines. It is a huge thing out there for pageantry. So several years back, Pia Wurtzbach, whose father is from Germany, okay, won. And then of course, we come back to singing and our artists. This is Robert Lopez, who wrote Frozen, right? And so again, I bring that up to you to tell you, like, there are so many different types of mestizo experiences. So what I may say today may resonate with some people, I may not, because we all have different experiences. But I think what brings us all together is a sense of duality and ambiguity. And I would even say Filipinos in general. Like, when you go to college and you meet people who've never met Filipinos, it's kind of jarring to the system, because for most of us, we grew up around that. Okay, so I just have a couple norms today as we kind of jump into this conversation. And like I said, I'm going to help facilitate some. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I don't know if we do we have breakout room opportunities in this, Margaret?
No, sorry, Dr. Cooke,
Okay.
we don't have it
That's
here.
totally fine. I will just kind of have a big discussion with everybody. So hopefully, my hope is that everybody contributes to the conversation, because it's really about how we look at this and say, normally I'd have like an elbow partner talk and try to make it a little bit more interactive for you. So hopefully, we'll get some people speaking up. Okay. All right. So just honor the dialogue, share at a comfort level, but more importantly, celebrate you. All right. So if I'm going to ask you to celebrate and to talk at a high level, I think it's important that I share my story as well, because I'm going to ask you to share some of your story. So this is kind of my quick story. This is my father, my mother on their marriage day. My father has since passed. My mom is not doing as well. But, my dad tells the story of meeting my mom, in the Philippines. And it's a fairly common story about the military presence in the Philippines. And there are so many mixed people in the Philippines because of some of this Navy and US influence, right? To the right, first of all, I just want to say the mandatory big spoon and fork, yes, thank you very much, was in the house. You shouldn't have to look too carefully, but you can see the big spoon, and you could see, I was hoping you could see the plastic on some of the furniture, because that is beyond Filipino right there, okay? When you get all those things and the big fork and the big spoon. But that's my mom, and that's my Lola, and that's me as a little one right there. My Lola would bring me to really these amazing pageants, because she grew up in the part of the Philippines, Cavite, which is more about kind of a Spanish influence of what's called the Chabacanos. So growing up, I didn't know that she spoke Spanish, fluently, and she was influenced a lot by that Spanish experience. And so when I would go to these events, it was kind of different to hear Filipinos speaking not only Tagalog but Spanish, and it was a very interesting experience growing up. But my grandma would tell me stories, and as a child, I just, she would try to teach me Tagalog, and I just didn't want to learn. I couldn't get the sound, like my tongue just couldn't do it, and I still can't do it. So when I walk into the Filipino classes, I have to just kind of fake it a little bit, right? And so, but I do remember when I went into college, something happens when you start realizing who you are really matters, and when you start diving deeper into your culture and your roots. And I realized I didn't really take advantage of this great opportunity to learn from my Lola. And so I learned Tagalog when I was in college. I did everything I could to learn it, because we would have a chance to speak at our graduation, and I wanted to speak in Tagalog to my grandma. The sad thing was my grandma passed away 1 month before graduating from UCLA. But I did say my speech, nevertheless. I knew she was with me on that day. But that moment crystallized for me about what it really meant to be part of such a special community about being Filipino. and more importantly, about being able to celebrate what it was like to also have an equally, I think, positive experience being Black and Latino in this kind of Caribbean Haitian world. So, bring those cultures together for me was such an amazing experience, um, and it brought me to wanting to know a little bit more um, about my history. At UCLA, I took a class with Uncle Roy, who's very famous at UCLA, and I was with, for the first time, thousands of Filipinos in one class, and all of us connecting. And it didn't matter that some of us were from the Philippines, some of us were from Michigan, some of us were from New York. We all bonded in what it meant to be Filipino, because there was a common understanding that we had, whether it's the food, whether it's the dress, whether it's the music, all of those things came together. And for the first time, I really wanted to be more Filipino than I'd ever been in my life, because now I was really connecting with people who were teaching me a little bit more about my background and my history than I knew. But some of you may have been aware of this because you were in some of the other sessions, so I won't go over a lot of it. But I just want you to know that there's considered 4 big waves of how Filipinos came to the U.S., and it deals a lot with our conversation today about being mixed. But the thing that I think is really fascinating to me is at some point there was anti-miscegenation laws, and I was going to share some of these and have you go around and talk about them with pictures about abolishing white people from being able to marry Filipinos. And it's hard for me to believe that actually happened at any point. And actually laws that didn't allow Filipinos to integrate into society, even in LA. And it was very, very, like I said, it was an awakening for me about understanding about how proud I am of my Filipino culture and the people who came before me. The Monongs who came and really set the stage for our freedoms and our ability to express our culture. And now look at us now. We're part of this mainstream American culture. So, when I look at the 4th wave, it's the most important wave because that's when most of the Filipinos came here. And it was mainly through skilled professions. So, we all know the stereotype about nurses because, I have a ton of family members who are nurses, and educators. And it was called the brain drain, right? And then a lot of Filipinos were brought into the military. That's how many of my uncles came over here. So if you want to read up on it, this is a really great book. It's Filipinos of Forgotten Asian Americans. And that to me is also a very interesting conversation about how people see themselves as either Asian or Pacific Islanders, about how they really identify. All right, a couple more things, and I'm going to try to have all of you discuss. So I took a sojourn to the Philippines. This was a little while ago. This is before I had kids. About 15 years now it's been, and I'm planning to go back very soon. But this is my family in the Philippines, and these are all my cousins I had never met because we could not get them visas yet to come to. They're still waiting to get their visas to come to the Philippines to immigrate here. But that was a sojourn means a journey or a trip of discovery. And at that moment, it was probably the first time in my life that I had just really sat down and thought about what it meant to be Filipino. This is a beautiful place called Anilao, and we also went to a place called Tagaytay, which was, if you go to the Philippines, you have to see Tagaytay. It's beautiful. And it has a volcano and a lake and all these great things. But I remember looking out and seeing all my cousins, for the first time, and just how accepting they were of me and how they couldn't wait to meet me because they had never met their American cousin. So, I hope one day I'd love to be able to bring all of you on a sojourn if you haven't been to the Philippines yet, and we all kind of do a discovery. I think during the Christmas time would be like the most special time. But that is something that I've always dreamed of taking Filipino students back to the Philippines so they could connect with their roots and really come back empowered about what amazing culture they're part of. Okay, so this was the experiment we're going to try, but we're going to just have several discussion points today. And then I'd just love to hear from you about your own mixed experience, okay? Or your experience with mixed people, or perhaps you have aunts and uncles and interracial relationships. So the first thing is, I'm very curious. When people look at something, like this, like a census form, what do people mark? In this box, it says here, there's Filipino, there's other Asian. Um, so if you see this and you think about it, Chinese and Filipino, and then you have other Asian. So I'm kind of curious, when you see something like this and there isn't the box Filipino, and let's just say there's something like Pacific Islander, what do you all check off? And I think this will start our conversation. So I'd love to see some hand raise or just jump in. I'd love to hear from the students because it's about your learning too, not just me talking. Go for it.
So, Alvaro, I know you had your hand up earlier. Do you have your questions still that you'd like to ask Dr. Cook? You just need to unmute yourself. There you go. Oh, wait. There. Nope. Oh, no, he put his hand down. So nothing in the chat yet, Dr. Cook.
Okay.
But I can answer this question for me personally, because I will say that this is something I do struggle with. I think growing up, I just automatically put Asian because that was the only option at the time when I was younger. And then as I got older and I would see Filipino, I definitely would check that one. But I am not gonna lie, I would be really confused when it would say Asian or Pacific Islander.
Okay.
And then I've had some friends that would tell me one and tell me the other. So I kind of just default to Asian again, just because it's the one I grew up with.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Magabasco. So if anybody here perhaps wants to speak to you, if they're have identified themselves as mixed, perhaps, think about what it says here too. And you could only mark one. Do you mark one? Or do you try to go against the norm? How does that feel for some of you when you see something like this that perhaps doesn't include specifically Filipino or an opportunity to put mixed? What do you put? Brave souls.
I know, you could just go ahead and unmute, guys, and
yeah, that's why I think breakout rooms allows for a little bit more. That's okay though.
I see Laura here.
Okay, well, we can move on a little bit because there's some different kind of questions. Hopefully, we'll get some other people answering. Otherwise, it's going to be the adults speaking, and I'd rather hear from the students. Right?
You guys hear from us all the time.
All right, so when I was in college, I wanted to study sociology. I wanted to be a sociologist and study mixed people. And I'm not going to read everything in here, but the main parts about this is when we look at identification, people, consistently have to navigate this world in which they either identify with themselves or how other people identify them. And for the most part, they identify by their phenotype. So if you look more Filipino than you look, let's say, African or Latino, you tend to go in that direction, okay, about what other people see you as, look at. So that's always one part of a struggle for many people who have ambiguous looks about how they see themselves because they want to be accepted, okay? So I'm just kind of, like I said, curious about if you've never ever met a Filipino and someone was trying to say Filipinos, what are Filipinos? How would you describe, what it means to be Filipino? Could people understand? Like, for example, as I said before, my wife had never met someone Filipino until college. So how would you describe being Filipino to other people? So this is where we do the pair share, right? And all those type of things. So what makes you Filipino? Any brave souls? It's a silent crowd. It's okay. I'll just give it about another 20 seconds. Sometimes just waiting time is important.
was the question?
How would you describe what it means to be Filipino, Julian?
Since I'm a Filipino, like since I've been knowing some Filipinos, I feel like they're kind of like family. Like we're close. Like that's how it kind of feels like, to be honest.
I appreciate that, Julian. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's see, someone sharing the chat room. I normally say with hospitality, not pour generosity and positively, especially things like spirit. Okay, and then, friendship and neighbors. So when I usually hear from people about how they describe, it usually is around the culture, right? Typically, hospitality comes up, the family sense. You know, for example, like I grew up with people who I called aunts and uncles, and I never even knew they weren't my aunts or uncles because I just assumed my mom wouldn't lie to me and say that's your auntie or uncle. But that's kind of the family experience, right? When people came over, everybody was always fed. There was always way more food. And so, but we also have something about our culture that makes it a little bit different when people don't understand it, right? I used to kind of get shy when my friends would come over because my mom would make them take off their shoes. And it would bother me because nobody else's house had to do that, right? Or, you know, sometimes, you know, our house smelled like patis, you know, and fish sauce. And my friends would be like, what is that smell? And, you know, as you grow up, you kind of think about that, right? And you think about some of the things that you perceive as not being good enough because it's not part of the mainstream, right? And so I wanted to bring that up because I think that plays a big role in how we either really celebrate ourselves or we try to really integrate and try to be as like every other person, right? And I so much regret sometimes not, you know, like really when my grandma would make these, you know, like great dishes and not really being able to tell people like, you know, there's a little bit more to us too, right? Than just the shoes and the food, you know, those kind of things. But all right, I'm going to kind of move on. But here's a really great, I think, definition too of what it means to be Filipino-American.
A lot of people just can't seem to guess my ethnicity on the first try. I've gotten Mexican, Japanese, Thai, mixed Asian, and Black, but they always fail to guess the one thing that I am: Filipino-American. For me, Filipino culture is a melting pot of Spanish and American history with other Asian traditions mixed in. As a Filipino, I'm proud of my rich heritage, but at times I still struggle with where I fit in. And I know I'm not the only one.
My name is Sunshine Arcilia. I'm 21 years old and I am a first generation Filipino-American.
My name is Alex Gonzaga. I'm a junior here at the University of Washington. I'm 20 years old and I'm full Filipino. And I like to consider myself a Filipino-American.
My name is Emmy Daniels. I just turned 18 in March and I'm Korean, white, Filipino, and Chinese. I grew up in the Philippines in this province called Lonion. I was born and raised there up until I was about 12 years old. And then I came here to America with my mom and my sister.
Both of my parents were born in the Philippines, but I was born in Washington, born and raised here, and lived here all my life.
My mom, she came to America from the Philippines. She came here with 8 of her sisters because they wanted to have a better future. When I first got here, and they asked me to check off a checkbox. Am I Asian or am I Pacific Islander? I said, I'm Filipino. I don't know where I fit in this.
In American culture, sometimes we end up assimilating a lot, and I see it a lot in people that I've met in the past.
I witnessed some of my cousins like really put like clothespins on their nose and sleep through it at night just to hope that their noses would get, you know, a little bit more like a white person's nose.
I would have to probably recall a time in elementary school days, probably for me, because I have a lot of dietary restrictions that I would often not be able to eat the school lunches, and I would bring lunch from home, like chicken adobo or like lumpia, pinakbet, stuff like that. These things, they weren't exactly like accepted well by my friends because I would often get comments like, ooh, what are you eating? Or like, what's that smell?
I just felt kind of embarrassed because I didn't have what the other kids were having, since I always packed home lunch and they always had like pizza or cheeseburgers and french fries. So it felt weird.
It's a constant thing that happens to feel like you are not so much marginalized, but actually, yes, marginalized for being Filipino.
I'd also hang out at school and people like, oh, look, there's the white kids or there's the Asian kids. And I'm like, which one am I? I'm kind of like both.
There's a lot of different layers when you have to dissect Filipino-American culture. I would say that one of the big things is loyalty and being true to your values.
Filipinos are talented, yes. Filipinos are great fighters, yes, right? But we are so much more.
My mom, when Miss Universe, she won Miss Philippines. It was really amazing. Everyone's like, oh, yay, represent our country, represent everything.
I feel empowered, honestly. I feel resilient. Resilience is at the core of being Filipino.
Being Filipino it encompasses so much more than just a single culture.
Embrace yourself and be who you are and be proud of who you are.
Okay, so I love playing that video because it's really I'm going to kind of start wrapping this up a little bit because we're coming up on our time, but I think a lot of it is about trying to understand your own background, right? And really digging deeper than just the surface thing about food and dress and dance. When we really get down to what the shared experiences with whether it's Asian, Pacific Islanders, our African American brothers, communities, and it really kind of starts being an empowering moment, as these students had said. But Mrs. Magabasco, I think you had your hand raised. Yep.
So for you growing up Mestizo, did you have any cultural values that maybe like conflicted with each other and you had to kind of choose which one to go with?
I think both of my parents, because they were both immigrants,
Mhm.
didn't know how to navigate perhaps the American world as well as they could have. My dad, grew up in segregated Boston, so
Mhm.
he understood racism at a way different level than my mother. And but my mom always believed in education. And so I think the conflict that kind of happened sometimes was that my parents didn't know how to advocate for me. And so college and those type of things, I think for the most part, most Asian families expect it, right? And my dad didn't really kind of push it. And my mom not as much. And so I had to really learn that world by myself. And so not that they didn't value education, but I think they both, the conflict was about, like whose responsibility was it? Was it them? Was it the school? So they always trusted the school. So if I ever came home and I said, oh man, my teacher, they just said the teacher's right, always, no matter what, right? So, there wasn't anything I would say that was like, boom, like opposite, experiences. If anything, it complemented each other. And I think that's why I always say Filipinos are such great, they just mix well with other cultures and communities.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So just a couple more questions or just some things to think about, right? That as one of the students was talking about, like, there's stereotypes out there, right? Just the other day, I heard somebody talking about, stereotypes of Filipinos, about being good in math, being dancers, and then you hear some of the really bad things. There was a book called The Dog Eaters, and I remember as a kid, people asking me like, "Did your family ever eat, your dog?" And so I was like, "What are you talking about?" Like I've never, heard any of that stuff. But you again, you find out a little bit more of yourself as you grow up. And so this is what I really wanted to kind of share with you as we kind of wrap up here today. I try to really encourage people to really think about what it means when we say we're less than, right? And I've come full circle on this. And when I used to tell people like, I'm 50% Filipino and 50% and 25% this and 25% that. And my daughter was trying to talk about this one time. I said, well, sweetheart, you're Filipino. Like it's who you are. Like, when you say you're only 25% of it, I don't want you to ever think you're less than. I want you to be around Filipinos and be able to say, TGIF, thank God I'm Filipino, and not feel like you have to fake that, right? And so, these are some of the other things, I would have asked you if we had a chance to kind of break out. And, but think about what it looks like when your families get together. I can tell you Thanksgiving's my favorite time of the year because, we have the turkey, we have the lumpia, we have everything, and I just love seeing all the food that comes together, right? And in our families, we have so many different mixed kind of couples. My brother is married to someone who's white. My cousin is married to someone from Iran. So we have all these different types of people. And again, I always look and go, wow, man, I just love how, people can mix. And, of course, I have a lot of my Filipino cousins that when we hang out, it's just about the family. Okay. All right. So I just kind of wanted to leave you with this thought about what it means to be, mixed or what it means to even be Filipino sometimes in this community that doesn't understand our culture at times. There's a Bill of Rights that Maria Root, I remember studying with her, and she would talk to us about, you have the right to not to keep the races separate within me. There's going to be times when people want you to be one or the other. There's going to be times when you have the right to identify yourself the way you want to, given who you're with, to choose differently at times. I work a lot also with our BSUs and our Black Student Union, and and I think it's okay to say, yeah, I am Black. And then, and then they say, well, are you just Black? I go, well, yeah, my mother's Filipino, right? So I think there's ways to always kind of bring your culture to the forefront in a way that honors everything that's mixed about you, all right? And I think when you find other mixed people, there's always this sense of a connection. And so I bring this kind of conversation to all of you because I want all of my students, who are Filipino to do well. And I want those who are mixed and perhaps have a different experience to know that there's someone out there that they can connect with and always be in their corner. So like I said, if you ever need me, I'd love to speak to you. I know you're going to do great things. And being part of here today, I think the most important question is when people ask what you are, there's something powerful about saying Filipino ko. And so I wrapped that up with a little bit of humor too. If you don't know Rex Navarrete, I think this is also a different way to look at what it means to be Filipino in a fun way at poking fun of ourselves. All right.
Hi, I'm Rex Navarrete, professional stand-up comic since 1989. How do you spot a Filipino in the wild, I'd say, and growing up in the States? How do you find a Filipino just right? I have a Pinoy sense, it's like a sixth sense, who's Pinoy, right? Just by the way we stand and our faces go. And this is my favorite one. This is how Pinoy dudes always just say hello to each other. Just that, that's amazing. It's like the whole face smiles, you get a smile here, and then you get a smile in the eyes and the eyebrows, all at the same time. I love that, right? And you can get their attention, of course, internationally. You can spot any Pinoy, even if they're hiding out, they're pretending to be another race or another culture, you just go, and then they will look no matter what, they will fight it with every cell in their being to not look. I walk around America with a nice, tire and just deflate it every now and just and see how many Pinoys, just come out of the woodwork, right? That's how you separate the Pinoy workers at the Thai restaurant you're eating at, right? Oh my God, you're in a Filipino neighborhood in America when for some reason you smell garlic and vinegar coming out of someone's window. Right? And you can tell it's a Pinoy house because of multi-colors going on, like orange, green, and white. These are Irish colors. I don't know why we decorate our homes like that. But everyone's got a Toyota Corolla or Camry in the front, and our Christmas lights are still up. It's July. We still have our Christmas lights up. Well, Filipinos are everywhere. And that's one of the cool things about, no matter where you go, like if it's the States or Canada or Europe, we're everywhere. We're taking over the world. It's the truth, right? Yeah, we're taking over the world. It is Operation Maritas at its best. How did that happen? Where did we get to the ability to just point with, because we're always carrying stuff and you always need a free hand to point. But you know, I don't know. Maybe and it's funny that if you're pointing to an object and it's nearby with your lips, you point with your lips, you have to accompany it with a sound. Yeah, so if it's right here, just right there, right? Yes, but if it's far away, yeah, so you have to expand the sound. That's amazing. And so when I tried, right? So, like, where do you live? So yeah, that's about 4 blocks away. That's at a 4-block away sound. It connotates distance. If something's behind you, right there. So there, just reverse lips. That's what I'm saying. Reverse lips. And you can also tell a Pinoy in America or anywhere in the world, if they're pushing themselves through a crowd, they need to get through a really big crowd, they will put their hand out and say, excuse me, with the hand out. And I found out this is the sharpest thing in the universe, because if you don't get out of the way, we will cut you in half. I don't know, my titas would always do this whenever, they got to walk in between me and the TV show that I'm watching. Excuse me. It's like, you're just covering more to the TV than I want to see, tita.
Okay, I'm going to stop because I want to honor my time, which is 11:40 stop time. But I think Rex Navarrete does such a great job of telling us that it doesn't matter where you are, right? We are all connected, even if you're, ambiguously looking Filipino. There is a way to connect, and that works every single time. It's one of my favorite things to do at school to make the kids laugh, because they look too. They can't fight it. All right. So have a great rest of the day. I'm really proud of all of you. And if you ever need your tito, I'm over at Eastlake High School. All right. Thank you so much.
Val's here with me too, Dr. Cooke.
Hey, Val, how are you?
All right, so Frida, go ahead and make the announcement.
I wanted to say thank you, Dr. Cook, for taking time from your busy schedule to talk to us high school students. And thank you, attendees, for coming to this session. I put a link in the chat for the next session or the ending session. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'll see you all at the ending then.
Yes. Thank you, Dr.
All
Cook.
right. Yep. Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Val. You guys did a great job. Let's see.